Hello again. I've spoken before about Enoch Powell, one of the most intelligent and honest politicians seen in Britain since the end of the Second World War. Because his most famous speech was delivered over 50 years ago, in 1968, those who wish to dismiss him as a racist demagogue often try and distort or misquote what was said and hope that nobody will notice what they are doing. People think they can tell any silly lies about Powell at his speech and nobody will notice, or even if they do notice, they won't much care. One such person is Reni Eddo-Lodge, author of this awful book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. She may be seen in the thumbnail to this video. Eddo-Lodge's book, although filled with the most shocking errors of fact, exaggerations, dubious assertions, became a bestseller. And there's a lot of recommendations. Look at this, The Independent, The Observer, all the usual suspects seem to think she's a great person. I've pointed out some of the mistakes and what looked to me like deliberate falsehoods in this book before, but I want today to say a few words about Enoch Powell and how Reni Eddo-Lodge talks about him in this book. Let's just see what she has to say. In 1968, the late Conservative politician Enoch Powell told a rapt audience in a speech about the ills of immigration, in this country in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. Inadvertently, he revealed his own tacit recognition of racist power relations in the country at the time, and although he didn't explicitly say it, because he knew what side he was on, Powell clearly thought that a power transfer in race relations would lead to white British people facing the mistreatment and systemic barriers that black people were working to overcome. There is a reason why he said whip hand over rather than using the less symbolic phrasing advantage over. Whip conjures images of beatings, misery and forced labour, of subjugation and total dominance, of slavery. Yes. Okay, there's no doubt whatever that the author wants her readers to think that Enoch Powell used the expression whip hand and chose it on purpose to convey a certain impression. I know this is not true, and I dare say that some viewers will also be aware of this. Eddo-Lodge gives as a reference for her statements. I've been checking through some of her references. Really, most of them have been taken from the internet in recent years. She's done no proper research. She gives us a reference to her statement about the business of the whip hand, Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech at Daily Telegraph, 6th of November 2007. I provide a link in the description to this video to the article she cites so that we can all read it for ourselves and know exactly what was said and what Reni Eddo-Lodge read and knew. Here's what Powell really said. A week or two ago, I fell into conversation with a constituent, a middle-aged, quite ordinary man employed in one of our nationalised industries. After a sentence or two about the weather, he suddenly said, if I had the money to go, I wouldn't stay in this country. I made some deprecatory reply to the effect that even this government wouldn't last forever, but he took no notice and continued, I have 3 children, all of them been through grammar school and 2 of them married now with family. I shan't be satisfied till I have seen them all settled overseas. In this country, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. Okay, viewers will see at once what has been done here. Powell quoted one of his constituents who used a certain expression. Gambling on the fact that none of her readers will bother to check the speech itself, Reni Eddo-Lodge says that Powell himself deliberately chose to use that expression because of the connotations. We know what source she used, and so this cannot possibly be a simple mistake, but is an attempt to mislead people. That is a very mischievous thing to do when writing a book about racism and race relations. It makes me think that she is stirring up racial hatred on purpose, although I hope I'm wrong about that. The idea that Enoch Powell, an immensely cultured and erudite man, would have used such a colloquial expression as having the whip hand is itself ridiculous, of course. Here is a man who was, at the age of 25, the youngest university professor in the whole of the British Empire. As for the claim that he was a racist, this is utterly baffling. Two anecdotes might shed light on this idea. During the war, Powell was an army officer in India. In 1946, before India was granted independence, he was travelling around India with an Indian officer, a general. At that time, Powell was staying at a British Officers' Club in the city of Pune. He took General Cariappa, with whom he was travelling, for a drink at the club, and was told that it would be impossible to serve the other man there because he was Indian and only white people were allowed in the club. Upon which Powell ordered his luggage to be removed from the place and went to stay at the home of General Cariappa. Does this sound like a racist? Later on, the general visited England and took Powell and his wife out. Powell had not the slightest colour prejudice. It was Enoch Powell who denounced the atrocities at the Hola internment camp in Kenya in 1949, which forced the government to take action. He was shocked and disgusted at what the British Army was doing in Hola and in suppressing the Mau Mau insurrection. What Powell did in the late 60s was to give a voice to the fears of those who were frightened about what unrestricted immigration might lead to, and said that he shared those anxieties and thought it a bad idea to bring in too many immigrants to Britain. Racism did not enter into the question. When I read books like this, I must confess that I get a bit cross. The woman who wrote this book knows that what she has written about Enoch Powell is misleading to the extent that it might be described as a falsehood. There's no excuse because we can see what source she consulted. She did exactly the same thing in a section about the First World War, consulted a source and then twisted it in order to mislead readers. This is an awfully dangerous game to play when you're writing about race, and she ought to be ashamed of herself for doing so. Terrible. No wonder she isn't talking to white people about race anymore. They've probably snorted in derision and pointed out the shoddy reasoning and many mistakes in her arguments, and so she feels it better policy only to talk about the subject with other black people. As usual, in the description to this video, I give a couple of links which might prove interesting.